This podcast and accompanying video contain visual and auditory evidence from a real case, some of which may be difficult for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Tin Ho. You're listening to our podcast, Off the Record, where we go beyond the headlines to share real case stories and give you a behind-the-scenes look. We'll dive into public safety topics and explore how our office is working to deliver justice, both in and out of the courtroom. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catrina Ranum, and I'm the host of Off the Record. Today, we're discussing human trafficking, and I have two guests on our show. Courtney Martin, who is a specialized prosecutor in our office who is assigned solely to handle human trafficking cases, and Detective Jason Collins, who is a detective with the Sacramento Police Department, who is also specifically assigned to handle these cases. Today, we are talking about a case that you actually both handled. Tell us what happened, Courtney.
Yeah, so this case really started out in early 2020, so right before COVID. And that case really starts with our victim. Her name was Sarah, and she was about 24 years old at the time. She had been involved in a life that involved prostitution for several years. In fact, she got into that life because she was taught by some other relatives how to make money through prostitution. I think one of the things that really stood out about Sarah when you talked to her is that she was very simple. She had, kind of unsophisticated the way she presented and described her life. She was not in a stable housing. She didn't have an ID, so she wasn't able to get a job. She was working for wellness recovery, and just somebody who was kind of living day to day in survival mode to a significant extent. And in early 2020, she meets the defendant in this case. His name's Kenneth Hawkins. He was a longtime felon who'd been to prison multiple times for some very serious charges. He had recently gotten out of prison for doing a robbery with a firearm. He'd had a pretty lengthy sentence for that. He was in his mid-30s. So a little bit older than her, and he was still on parole at the time that he met her. So she was actually working at this job and was at her lunch break and ran into him in the parking lot. And they developed this relationship. And in her mind, this was a romantic relationship. This was somebody that she loved and that she cared for and looked to for security. And in kind of the chaos of some of the things that she was dealing with in her life, this was someone that she looked to as an answer for those things.
What was in his mind?
Yeah, unfortunately, he was the wrong person to look for. He was looking to make money off of her. And because she had been involved in prostitution, she knew that life. He completely took advantage of that and exploited her. And as they started their relationship, from everything that I've seen in the evidence, it didn't necessarily start out as a violent relationship. She was willing to go make money this way and give him that money. But in the weeks that followed, kind of early 2020, their relationship became increasingly violent. She would be accused by him of being sneaky, trying to keep money. She was supposed to make money and give him all of it. And if he didn't think she was doing that, he would become threatening and menacing. He said that he had family members who would harm her. He would physically assault her. And when we eventually, as law enforcement, come upon Sarah, she really was just covered in bruises and scratches and just various signs of the assault that she had been through from him in kind of various states of healing. So there would be a bruise on her arm that looked old, and there would be a bruise on her other arm that looked fairly new or fairly fresh. And so you could kind of see what the weeks leading up to the incident that we're going to spend the most time talking about today, you could kind of see what those weeks had been like just from looking at her body. And so she's obviously becomes fairly scared of him, but she's in this situation. She really doesn't have a way out. She doesn't have anyone she can go to. And I think she really did not believe that she could leave him without repercussions. So this all leads up to March 1st, 2020. So if you remember that time, it was right before COVID. We were kind of just about to enter this really different world. But things were still normal at that point. She had gone to the Bay Area with the defendant, and she had made some money out there through prostitution, and then had come back. And somewhere along the way, he became angry again because she, according to him, she was being sneaky. She was not obeying him, not doing what she was supposed to be, doing. And so they come back to South Sacramento, and there's an area in South Sacramento called the Blade, and that's actually a term that's used all over. It refers to the prostitution stroll area, and that's where, women and girls who are engaged in prostitution will stand on the street, and sex buyers will come in their cars and meet up with them, and they'll go somewhere where they can do an act of prostitution. And so I think that the defendant had become increasingly angry and frustrated with her, and she wasn't listening to his directions fully. And so he got angry, and he had other friends who were also pimps, who were also traffickers, there, and they're at a parking lot of a liquor store and kind of a strip mall on Franklin Boulevard. And then we get a video that you can actually go on and see it. A video that was Instagram broadcaster. It was on Instagram Live. And in this video, you see what happened to Sarah. Sarah is standing by the car, the defendant's car, Hawkins' car, and she's surrounded by men who are yelling at her. There's 6 or 7 men who are all yelling at her, and she's standing there. She has these glasses on that kind of cover part of her face, and she's not looking at them. She's looking down the whole time. And that's kind of a part of this world. You're not supposed to look at someone else in the eye, particularly someone who might be another pimp. So when all these other men are yelling at her, she's remaining submissive. She's got her eyes down. And they're yelling. They're yelling things like, choose up, bitch. And they're saying that over and over, choose up, bitch. And that's basically a reference to the fact that she belongs to the defendant, and if she wants to go somewhere else, she wants to have a different pimp or be involved with someone else, she's going to have to choose up. And so they're basically telling her, you've got a choice: be submissive or choose up. And she's just got her eyes down the whole time. At one point, the defendant slams the car door into her, so she's kind of standing in the V that's made by the passenger side and the passenger side door. He just slams it into her, and most of us would react right away. We would yell or
flinch,
flinch, and she just barely reacts. This is she's completely subservient. This is about shame. This is about control. And at one point, the defendant tells her, you need to go sit over on the sidewalk, basically, and you can just see her kind of shuffle over to the middle of the parking lot. This is broad daylight. This is about 4:30 in the afternoon. And she sits down on the asphalt. She's got her back to the people who are still yelling at her. And the defendant says these words that just kind of always stick in my mind. He says, how does it feel to be embarrassed, bitch? And that's what they were doing. They're trying to embarrass her.
Caution: the video that is about to be played is graphic and may be alarming to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Who you wanna rock with though, bitch? Choose up though, bitch. Who I want though, bitch? Who you trying to pick though, bitch? Choose up. Choose up, bitch. Choose up, bitch. Choose up. Choose up, bitch. Choose that. Choose up. Choose that. Choose up. Alright, y'all sit in the motherfucking middle of the motherfucking stag, then, bitch. Stop the cars from getting by. I got cars, bro. Spin it out, bitch. Put your bitch ass down right there. Right there. Oh! Sit down. Oh my God. Oh God. Hey, bitch, how I feel to be embarrassed, bitch. Bitch, ready to pay, bitch. Bitch, you better stop playing with this shit, bitch. This is it, bitch. I'm irate, bitch. What we do? Irate.
But it doesn't end there, and in fact, it gets much worse. So there's a person who's coming through the parking lot. All the witnesses describe this as a homeless guy. He's carrying a bag of takeout food, and the defendant goes up to him and basically the defendant says, do you want to have a blowjob? I have somebody here who will orally copulate you right here in the parking lot for free, no cost to you. You can see in surveillance video all of the subjects who are there. So the men who are there, this person who's described as this homeless guy with his takeout food, the defendant, and then Sarah basically head back to the back of the parking lot. And that's where the defendant continues to yell at her. He has a bat. At this point, he's hit her, not with the bat, but with his hands. He's holding the bat, threatening her, and she's forced to orally copulate this stranger for free in front of all these people who are yelling at her. At some point during that, somebody says, I think the police are on their way, so everyone scatters, everyone leaves. And Sarah leaves with the defendant, and they go back to an apartment that's not far away, where he's been staying.
Did no one, you said this was broad daylight, did no one see this or report this?
Yeah, so actually someone did report it, and that's how law enforcement becomes involved in this case. There was a clerk at the liquor store who saw what was going on. So right around 4:30 in the afternoon, the police department gets this call that there are someone's giving oral sex in the parking lot, and you can hear the dispatcher. I think the audience will be able to hear this 911 call, and the dispatcher says something kind of disbelieving, like, you're saying they're doing sex acts in the parking lot? Mm-hmm. And this clerk, which is Good Samaritan, trying to report this bizarre scene that he's seen.
He knew it wasn't right.
Yeah, and he's like, yes, that is what's happening.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Yeah, I want to report a sexual harassment.
Okay, what do you mean? What's going on?
There's a black dude forced the lady to give oral sexual to the random white guy.
He forced her to do what?
Oral sexual, like a blowjob.
How do you know he's forcing her? What do you see?
Oh, he have a bat and he started hitting her.
Okay, and they're in a car, or?
They are right in front of the car.
And they're doing sexual acts in the middle of the parking lot in front of a car?
Yeah.
So the patrol units from the Sacramento Police Department, they come and they start trying to investigate, but by that point everyone is scattered, everyone is gone. And then maybe you can kind of talk about what happened from there with the investigation.
Yeah, so some really proactive police officers who on their own time have created like these Instagram accounts where they basically can use them as intelligence to see what bad guys are doing, right? And so these two young officers in their kind of like downtime were going on their Instagram accounts and checking to see what was going on, and then they see this video that Courtney described, and they put two and two together that, hey, that looks like that call for service from that parking lot. And they take the initiative to start doing the follow-up, and they're able to get the license plate from the video and figure out where the car is registered, and then they head over to that apartment to contact Sarah and Hawkins.
What happened when they arrived, though, at the gas station parking lot or the convenience store parking lot? Was anyone there?
No, they're gone. Everybody was gone.
Okay.
So they just kind of took the initiative on their own.
Okay.
And, did some really great police work to follow up on this instead of just letting it...
Clearing the call and saying everyone's gone.
Everybody's gone, nothing happened. And so, kudos to those officers to, really follow through on it.
And just how different this case would have turned out had they not gone and looked at that Instagram video.
Correct, because I doubt Sarah would have reported it to the police, her
Exactly.
situation.
Exactly.
And so it would have just basically kind of gone, uninvestigated.
So what happened when you said they found the license plate, they traced it back to Hawkins, and then what?
So they responded to that address, and they see Sarah standing outside by the car. And by this time, she's got some pretty severe injuries to her face. There's a
Can you tell us
laceration
about them?
over her eye, and then some more bruising. I think her lip was busted up pretty good. And then Hawkins was kind of coming out at the same time. And at that time, they didn't understand what the situation was, where we would, that there was some sort of sex trafficking, or at the least some sort of like prostitution type.
When you say that, you mean the patrol officers?
The patrol officers,
Got
yes.
it.
So they're investigating it as an assault, like a physical assault. And so they handled it according, to that type of investigation. And it wasn't until later when they began to get a statement from her, and this commercial sex aspect came into part of, being part of the investigation. And then that's when I was called in to help out.
And what was your role? What are the things that you did and what you learned about this case?
Sure. So my unit, the human trafficking unit, we're on call. So when calls for service like this come out, like patrol comes across one of these types of cases, they'll call us because we have all the specialized training and know how to do proper interviews with victims in this, who are victims of this crime. We know how. It's a trauma-informed, kind of victim-centered approach versus just like, hey, man, tell me the facts, right? Like we really try to meet the needs of the victims and, build that trust with them. They have to tell us some really, personal and horrible things, that's happened to them. So, we have to build that trust. So all that to say is, so once the officers realized that this was something more than just an assault, and that there was probably some sex trafficking involved, they called my unit, and I responded to go do a follow-up interview and then kind of whatever follow-up investigation needed from that point on.
Was the follow-up interview with Sarah?
Yes. So I went to the hospital, and like I said, she was in a rough state when I went to go talk to her.
Physically or emotionally?
Physically. Like Courtney said, her affect, her presentation was pretty flat. She just, I think once you've been in this world for a while, like this stuff just becomes normalized. This type of violence and control becomes normalized. So on the face of it, it doesn't look like she's very traumatized. But the injuries themselves, right? The lacerations, the busted lip, and every time she moved, it was very strained to move. You could tell she was in pain. She moaned in pain, and so it was a tough interview to do because she'd been through quite a bit.
There's one part in the interview that it always just stood out to me. It was a small detail, but she said something like, she was going to be released from the hospital. She had some stitches to her face. She was going to be released, and she said something like, I have money. Can somebody maybe call a taxi for me? Because at that point, her phone was still back in the car. And Jason jumps in really quickly, like, we're gonna take care of you. We're gonna make sure you get where you need to go tonight. But I think it's a good illustration of how she's just in survival mode.
Yep.
Like she's not thinking about justice or accountability for this perpetrator. She's just like, how am I going to get to my family members tonight where I can maybe get a few hours of sleep?
And I don't even have someone to call for a ride, so I'll just get most of us that would be appalling in itself, to not have someone waiting at your discharge. And she was just like, do you mind, I'll take a taxi.
Yeah. And that's what we handle with these cases is people who are in survival mode. It's not like on TV when somebody is, I'm a victim, please help me. I need to make a statement. I need law enforcement to go arrest a person who committed a crime against me. They're just trying to get to the next step.
So you had said, then going back, so this was ultimately, you ended up getting some information from her about what happened, right? If I can ask, was she fully cooperative or somewhere in between?
Yeah, she was cooperative in the sense that she would talk to me and give me a piece of the story. What we find a lot with our victims is a lot of times they'll minimize a lot of the aspects of the story, whether it's their involvement because maybe they're afraid of getting in trouble for, because prostitution is illegal, which we don't take enforcement against that because she's presenting as a victim of sex trafficking, or they like to minimize the involvement of their trafficker because they don't want them to get in trouble or
terrified.
They're terrified of any repercussions. So we kind of have to sift through that, and that's where I talk about being like specializing or trained in this because we know the good follow-up questions to ask to to really get down to the truth. But in this case, Sarah was minimizing, kind of both sides of the coin as far as what Hawkins' involvement was and basically the control that he had over her.
So she would say things like, well, I would do all of my own advertising and I would do this and I would give him a little bit of the money. And then part of the follow-up was to go locate the cell phones that had been left in his car and write search warrants so that we could access all of the data that was in those cell phones. And when we started to look at the text message communication between Sarah and the defendant and Hawkins, it was very clear that he was very involved in the most granular detail, directing her and instructing her what she was going to do. Stand here, walk on this side of the street. You need to make this much money before you can have a break. So she made it sound like he was just maybe the incidental benefactor, or beneficiary of her activity. And in reality, it was very clear that he was very, very involved.
So you did the actual trial. This went to trial. And when you did the trial, did the video that you described, that graphic video, did that come in for the jury to see?
Yes. So that was played multiple times for the jury to see. There was also some surveillance video that showed Hawkins coming up to the homeless guy and arranging. You can tell they're going back and forth, and the guy just kind of almost like shrugs his shoulders, and they all just troop back to the back of the parking lot. So you don't see what happens at the back of the parking lot. You don't see where she's forced to orally copulate this guy, but you do see everyone heading back.
Everything leading up to it.
Yeah.
And the 911 call from this Good Samaritan, you played that for the jury.
Yes.
And did Sarah come in for this trial?
No, so this was a little bit of an unusual situation. So typically, a victim of a crime who's made a statement to the police about what's happened to them, typically we're going to call them at trial. But this was unusual because we found evidence that the defendant had been reaching out to Sarah while he was in jail awaiting trial, and while we were trying to serve her with a subpoena and be able to get her to court. And in the jail calls, he was telling her not to come to court. Avoid the district attorney. Don't come in contact with law enforcement. They're looking for you. If you come to court, I'm going to face decades in prison, and if you don't come, they're going to have to dismiss the case. There's a doctrine called the forfeiture by wrongdoing doctrine, which says you don't get to benefit from that kind of misconduct. It's misconduct. It's witness tampering to reach out to someone and tell them not to come to court. So you don't get to benefit from that by then we have to, the prosecutor having to dismiss the case because they can't get the witnesses here. And so when that happens, instead of calling the witnesses, we get to present the audio and video recorded statements of those witnesses.
Of them dissuading the witness.
We get to present that, but we also get to present the audio and video recorded statements that are given to law enforcement. So
from the victim.
Yes.
Got it.
So on March 1st, when all of this happened, and Sarah talked to Detective Collins and she talked to the officers on patrol, those statements are audio and video recorded on body-worn camera. And so I was able to show the jury several hours of Sarah telling her story to Detective Collins and to the patrol officers that had been audio and video recorded from the body-worn camera.
And for our viewers, that particular component of the trial where you're playing Sarah's statements, that's for the truth of the matter. So that's as good as if she's in court describing it herself.
Correct. And it's an unusual situation, and it directly stems from the fact that the defendant took this action to dissuade her from coming.
Unusual, but extremely compelling when we can utilize it.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're always keeping track of jail calls and trying to determine whether that's happening. It happens more than you might expect or more than you hope for, and it's really on us to locate those calls from the jail. Sometimes somebody might be in custody for months and be making dozens of calls a day, so we have to sift through all of those calls and see whether that dissuasion is happening.
This is the part I want to hear about.
Yeah.
The defendant, did he testify?
Yes.
And for our viewers, let's just, so they can understand, the defendant's right to testify or not to testify is his right alone. That is just a sacred right that only he gets to decide, right? And fair to say, it doesn't always happen in all of our cases.
Correct.
Often they stay silent and invoke their right not to testify.
Yeah.
So in this case, he did.
Yes.
What did he say?
Yeah. So he was just a victim of circumstances. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He said that he had started a dating relationship with Sarah. It was just a dating relationship, had nothing to do with prostitution. He wasn't her pimp. He wasn't violent with her at all. And when he found out that she was engaged in prostitution, he wanted nothing to do with it. So all of the text messages, hundreds of pages of text messages, were
because
not,
you said in the messages he's telling her, go stand here,
Yeah.
sell your body for this much amount over there.
Yeah.
So what is
that
that?
was just someone else. She had this other guy. He was mad because she was cheating on him with this other guy. And so even though those phones were in his car, and she said that was him on the text messages, and it's him in the video giving her directions, that's just all a misunderstanding. He claimed that what was happening in the parking lot was a drug deal, that the guy with the takeout food was just looking for drugs, and that's what they trooped to the back of the parking lot to do, was to accomplish this drug deal. And when asked why he's saying choose up and these words that are just really pertinent to the subculture that involves trafficking, that involves prostitution and pimping, he said that was just, everyone else was saying it, and he didn't know why, or really why they were there, but all of a sudden just all these people are surrounding Sarah, yelling this. He doesn't know what they mean. He's just joining it.
He just yelled it out too,
Yeah,
for no
so
reason.
really just a victim of circumstance.
And what about him slamming her head into?
Yeah, well, he was
The
mad.
car
There
door.
was some domestic violence.
He came up on that.
Yes, there was some domestic violence, but unrelated to any kind of prostitution, unrelated to sex trafficking.
And so this is kind of a interesting area to make the community aware about. It sounds like what he was doing was owning up to some domestic violence,
Right.
but denying the human trafficking part.
Right.
Why would he do that?
Well, domestic violence carries a much lighter sentence than trafficking. Also, we had charged this as a trafficking case. We hadn't charged him with domestic violence. So he was essentially saying, I committed certain crimes. I was selling drugs. I assaulted her. But the crimes you've charged, the sex trafficking crimes, I did not commit those.
Because those have the higher punishment.
Absolutely, yes.
Did the jury convict him?
They did. It was a pretty quick verdict. This trial happened right in the heart of COVID. It was the first trial I did during COVID. It was September 2020. And so whereas normally you have this busy, bustling courthouse with people everywhere, attorneys, witnesses, defendants, victims, judges, it was like a ghost town. There was basically like tumbleweeds like bouncing through the hallways. And so it was basically just us in the courtroom or in the courthouse. You had normally jurors are in like a box and we're talking right to them, but because of COVID, we were practicing social distancing. So you had jurors out in the gallery, everyone was wearing masks. We had microphones because we were trying to make sure everyone could hear through the masks and kind of scattered throughout the courtroom. The witnesses and the judge were behind plexiglass. So just really, really unusual circumstances, an unusual way to try a case.
But notwithstanding all of that, justice was served.
Yes, absolutely. So the jury came back very quickly, and the defendant was sentenced to 28 years in state prison. So he is currently serving his prison sentence based on this conduct.
Do you ever talk to Sarah?
So I called Sarah. I was able to get a hold of her. We'd had lots of trouble getting a hold of her to have her come as a witness, which is why we ended up introducing her statement through the body-worn camera. I did call her. I was able to get a hold of her. And just like she had kind of presented on that day and throughout the times we communicated with her, she wasn't very reactive. She didn't seem sad or disappointed that he was convicted, but she also wasn't elated. She just sort of received the news, wasn't interested in participating in the sentencing hearing. Victims of crime can come make an impact statement or talk to the judge about how they feel about the case. She didn't choose to do any of that, and so we haven't had contact with her since then. I would say in our cases, it's sort of like no news is good news. We've had lots of victims that we repeatedly contact because they're repeatedly trafficked. And so if you don't talk to someone, it might be a good thing. They might be out of this life. And we've also had lots of victims over the years who've died prematurely through any number of reasons. It's a very high-risk lifestyle. So I always think it's probably a good thing if she's not on our radar and kind of coming in contact with us or with law enforcement.
Did she say anything on the phone? Do you remember anything she said? You said she received the news, but what did she actually say?
I think she just said I try to explain the options that you have. You can have a restraining order so he can't contact you from prison. You can make an impact statement. So I was trying to make sure she understood her rights as a victim. And she just said, okay. And I think I told her, we'll call you and let you know when the sentencing is done. We'll let you know what he ends up getting, because there's a bit of a range that the judge could select for the sentencing. But yeah, it didn't give me any information other than just affirm that she understood those things. Yeah.
Great work on this case, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. If you or someone you know may be a victim of sexual assault or human trafficking, there are safe, free, and confidential resources available. Please visit gethelpsac.org or click the link in the description to see what resources are available in your area.
Thank you for listening to Off the Record. Stay connected with us for more real stories, important updates, and insights into how we're making a difference in Sacramento County. Follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, and join us next time as we take you behind the scenes of justice in action.